Hello, everyone. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce you to the one and only Tola Gbalajobi, a Canadian Certified Counselor and soon to be Provisional Psychologist here in the city of Calgary. Thank you very much for joining me today, Tola. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm very well. My name is Matthew. I have the privilege of working at Masters. I get to work in the admin team. If you're lucky enough to call at a weird time in the evening or on the weekends, I'm probably going to be the guy who answers the phone and connects with you. So Tola, I just wanted to get an opportunity I wanted to use this as an opportunity for other people to get to know you. And one of the first questions I wanted to ask you is, what inspired you to become a counselor, and what continues to drive your passion for this particular line of work?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I feel like this is always what I've wanted to do. So as far as I can remember, this is the only thing that's been consistent about me, I like to say. Like I was always a kid doing a lot of different things. I did a new sport every year, but like when it comes to wanting to be a counselor, like at least since when I was 12, there was nothing else. Like I tried other things and I always came back to this. And I think um kind of goes into, like what my passion for this work, but like I really am passionate about people. And I think that's always been true in a lot of different capacities. So it's really, really cool to get to um, do what I'm most passionate about for work and
Wow.
just connect with people.
And I'm gonna just piggyback off that question.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you get to work with people and connect.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the outcomes that you just are excited to see people have as a byproduct of connecting with you in therapy or counseling?
What do I want to see or what is that what you're
Like,
asking?
yeah, like what's I guess like, you talk about the passion, you talk about how you're excited about it. Like, what are some of the things you just love to see in some of the people that you get
Mm.
to connect with?
Um, One thing I actually do say to clients very often is, obviously I ask a lot of questions and I get a lot of, I don't really know. And something I find I say a lot is, I think you know more than you think you do. And I
Mm.
say that because it's always true. And I guess watching clients realize that they know more than they think they do is really, really cool because I always say that my favorite part of my job is watching clients realize that they had the tools to solve their own problem the whole time. That's the most
Wow.
rewarding part for me. So I feel like it's kind of the same thing of it's not like I am not the solution, right? Like I am not fixing the problem. It's actually clients realizing what tools and resources they have to like
Wow.
live empowered. And that is my
Wow.
favorite thing. And it will never get old to me.
I love that. What I hear you saying is you're not their crutch. In fact,
No.
you're going to empower them to actually live a life that is um, able to see what they truly have within them. And
Yeah.
you're just helping them recognize that within them.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing. I love
Yeah, I feel
that.
like one of the biggest breakthroughs, like or breakthroughs that I feel like I see a lot is when just in the times when I reflect back what the client has said. Like I'm not throwing in anything crazy. I'm literally just saying what you said in a different way. And I feel like
Mm.
clients are always like, oh, well, I mean, when you say it like that, but I'm like, I just said what you said. You know what I mean? And they're like, oh, you know what I mean? So even stuff like that, it's really cool. I'm like, I'm not really doing much. I'm just saying what you said. And then all these new things.
Well,
Very funny.
that's very humble of you. Um, I don't think that's simply what's going on. I think that
Well,
I have a
yes.
feeling there's a few different tools and I don't want to use
True.
the word tricks, but methodologies that you've
Mm-hmm.
developed. And maybe that's a great segue into, you work
Mm-hmm.
with a very diverse range of clients. You work with adults, you work with youth, you work with couples. What do you find the most rewarding about working with all these different types of groups?
Um, Very different, but at the same time, I think my favorite thing is actually watching how like yes, all of those different groups of people are facing different things, but I honestly do very similar work with all these different groups of people, kind of just like self-awareness work or um just like digging to like what is on the foundation, where is our foundation and how strong is it built. So I also like seeing how much like I really do the same things with teenagers that I do with people across the lifespan that are really foundational, you know what I mean? So I guess connecting with people different ways, doing very similar things, I love that challenge, and I love taking on new approaches to work with people all the time, just being flexible.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if we could just segue into even one of those groups being relationships.
Yeah.
I understand that relational functioning is one of your key specialties. If I understand correctly, it was something that you actually specialized as part of your master's program. What are some
Mm-hmm.
of the most common challenges that you see in the relationships you work with, and
Mm-hmm.
how do you help clients navigate those issues or those struggles?
Yeah. Um, I feel like I always change. Like I often say like, "Ooh, this is my favorite thing to talk about right now." And it's funny because one of my favorite things right now, very relational, but like it comes up with everyone, is expectations.
Aha.
And that's huge. And like there is no client I work with where expectations is not something that we have to look at. More just because another thing that's really important to me is culture and cultural competency. And I think when we look at culture, even what is culture, like even just someone who was raised in a different family than me, their family culture, doesn't matter who they are, is different than my family. You know what I mean? So when it comes to expectation, there's so many things that we don't realize are like, I don't know, unconscious thoughts or all of these different things that are not communicated, because in a way we're kind of like, this is obvious, but like who is it obvious to? And then it's like the things that we have never spoken is often
Right.
where we can see issues, because it's kind of
Right.
like they're not meeting my expectation or all these things.
Right.
But something that's really cool that actually Maver Eagle told me last week, which has just been blowing my mind, is he was saying the thing about expectations is that expectations have to be agreed upon by two people, like by all the parties involved. So if you don't say those things out loud, it's not in play yet. You know what I mean? You can't
Right.
have an expectation of someone that they don't know about. So it's just so interesting. My favorite question to ask clients a lot is like, how do you know that? They hate when I ask that, but I'm just like, where's the evidence? Because that's when they realize like there actually isn't evidence. I actually filled in the gaps. So a lot of
Right.
times I'll be like, what happens? Like, what happens if you go into your life this week and just pay attention to all the places you fill in the gaps instead of asking questions? So that's a big one that I talk about a lot.
That's a fascinating topic. I think the topic
Mm-hmm.
of expectations, especially unrealistic expectations
Yeah.
versus realistic expectations. I guess a follow-up question to that would be is specifically in relationships, how do you help couples draw out
Mm-hmm.
those expectations that one person may have had that may not have been communicated, that
Mm-hmm.
maybe could potentially be the root of a particular issue?
Probably sounds so cliche, but like I learn the most based on the way people say things to me. So, like, for example, like, yeah, always everybody speaks really, really differently. So, that's one of the ways where, like, even my bias is when someone else speaks to me, they'll say things like, because obviously this, you know what I mean? When somebody says obviously, it's kind of like, everybody thinks this way is kind of like something that you can assume. So if I say, how do you know that? Or, that question kind of again, and like allowing people to be like, oh, where did this come from? It's a question that, like, if you don't know the answer, you can't answer it. That's why it's my favorite question, because where did this information come from? So a lot of times the way that people say things, they'll be like, oh, okay, is this something that's brought up before? All these things. And it's kind of like, no, I've never said this before. Then where did this expectation come from? Or like, how would this other person ever meet it if you've never said it before? Or things like that, kind of just like the way people kind of talk about things. Oftentimes you can hear unmet needs in the way that people
Mm.
talk about things. So sometimes it's kind of like, it sounds like it actually wasn't this. Maybe you have a need here that hasn't been met, and that's the way that you were communicating that. So it's really just listening, I think.
Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if I could maybe segue the conversation a little bit,
Yeah.
you talked about a few different tools.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of us that aren't therapists, one of the things I found fascinating is learning some of the tools that therapists develop, otherwise known as modalities. And
Hmm.
I understand that some of the modalities that you use or psychotherapeutic tools you use,
Hmm.
some of them are DBT, mindfulness, narrative therapy. Feel free to maybe explain some of the ones that you like the most. But I guess my
Hmm.
question is, how do you determine what tool or approach is best suited for a particular situation or a particular client?
Yeah. I mean, I say this to clients a lot, usually during like our first session, but kind of like um the way that I see people, obviously, like one size doesn't fit all when it comes to people. So I feel like because of that, I work with a lot of different modalities with the understanding like whatever the client needs is what we're going to do. So I kind of say that to clients that it's like, this is where I'm thinking we might start. If this isn't working for you, you let me know all these different things, but like whatever works is what we're going to do. If it doesn't work, that's okay. We try something else type of thing. So it kind of usually works like that. But I would say my primary modality is narrative therapy, and I love narrative therapy. Um,
Why is that?
one of the things I think I really love about it is, like I said, cultural competence is really important to me. And even like as a human being, like it's so interesting that I didn't recognize that I actually love storytelling, and that is a big part of narrative therapy. So a lot of times I'll say to clients, like, it would be probably really ridiculous if you walked into my office and I said, you're going to do this, and this. Why would I say that when I don't know anything about you or what you're experiencing? So, what I love about narrative therapy is that, like, clients really do get to tell me like the scope of this is my life, this is every piece, this is how where things fit, all this different stuff. It doesn't matter. Like I feel like clients sometimes they're nervous coming into therapy about am I getting the answers right or wrong, where there's no such thing. Especially when you're someone else is telling you their story, there isn't a wrong answer. And I love that where it's just like everything goes, every way you understand is how is right. So I think what's helpful in that is that clients get to evaluate this is my narrative, this is how I'm working with things. Now that we're seeing it like this, is this actually beneficial? Is this helping me or is this not helping me? Can I use a different resource that I have instead? And would this bring healthier outcomes? And I just love getting to evaluate things with clients. And like, I'm not really doing much. I'm just kind of like helping them, asking questions and seeing like, where does your mind go? So I really, really love how collaborative it is because that's really important to me.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One of the things I loved about that response was you almost slightly hit on some of the generalizations of counseling that people have, almost
Mm-hmm.
that idea.
Yeah.
Um, there's two paradigms I hear a lot when people talk about therapy. There's the scenario of you're going to come in to a dark room and lay on a leather couch, and there's this old white bald guy that's going to be judging you for an hour and ask
Mm-hmm.
you, what why did you think that or what makes and you almost go, how is that helpful? The other scenario I hear a lot is I call it the police officer narrative, where they think that they're going to come into counseling and they're just going to be told all the things
Right.
that they're doing wrong. Now,
Mm,
you don't strike me as either of those. You don't strike me as an old
yeah.
bald white guy
Not
at
quite.
all. Um, what I hear from what you're saying is that you really want to support those individuals. So what's it like to come into the counseling space with you? What does a typical counseling session look like?
Oh, ugh. I mean, I wouldn't say there is such a thing as typical, but yes, it involves lots of question asking, which is very much like me in my regular life too. But um, yeah, I don't know. It's like very exploratory. Um, I don't even that is actually a hard question. But I mean, yeah, no typical. It kind of just depends. And kind of like I said, with whatever the client needs is what we'll do is, like sometimes I'm doing narrative therapy, I hear something and we just switch gears. And we're like, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. And then I take on more of a driver's seat sometimes, which is different therapists do different things. But every once in a while I'll hear something where I'm like, okay, we actually need to like take on a situation and like pull it apart piece by piece. Because one thing I will say about me, and I tell every client this, I will sound like a broken record because I say the same things over and over and over again. My favorite thing is self-awareness. I think it's one of the most powerful tools. So even like I tell every client, I love to give homework. I give a lot of homework, but never paper homework. It's pretty much always awareness homework. I'm going to give you permission in a way to go into your world and pay attention in a way that you haven't before. But I'm not even kidding when I say that clients who do their homework come back night and day different every single week, because they're like, whoa, I saw all of these things that I've never seen before. And all I said is pay attention. What would you see? So many things. So I would say lots of that, and lots of exploring in that way with me, as well as just, what do we know about this? What do we not know about this? And learning like that, I guess.
It's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Another question I had for you is your work is strength-based and person-centered as some of the different focuses you utilize. Can you share an example of how this approach has helped a client in their specific personal growth?
Okay, wait. Example of how strength-based and person-centered?
Yeah.
Okay.
And,
I
and,
feel
and
like,
a hypothetical scenario.
yeah. I'm trying to think person-centered. What's an example? I mean, I don't know if this answers the question. I feel like it kind of did in the example I gave with the, I oftentimes start with narrative therapy. I don't know, unless there's a reason I do something different. And then oftentimes I might switch gears and I go into DBT a lot, which is a lot more hands-on for the therapist, but it's usually for a reason. So I feel like it's person-centered in the way of like, I don't know, being present with the client and being like, okay, I'm hearing that we need to do something different, or like, this is important. I think it's important that we stay here. So I don't know, like, it's just kind of being adaptable in a way is being person centered to me. Strength based, though, I love because I think it's such an empowering view. And I think this is something that maybe people don't understand about the therapeutic process is that, like, yeah, I don't know, like, we're not here to be like, you're the worst person ever. Don't do this, do this. Like, I actually don't do that. And clients get really mad that I don't tell them what to do, which is so funny because I'm like, not going to happen. Like, that's so funny that you thought I was going to tell you what to do. But I think strengths based is just in the ways that it's like, okay, let's look at what you actually have access to. I think when we are struggling, it's easy sometimes to look at like, okay, I'm stuck in this like, negative spiral where all I can see is the things that are going wrong, where sometimes we need to look at what resources do we have? What are we actually good at? And I think it's kind of the process of how do we adopt these things and include them in the way that you live your daily life. A lot of times we have vices and things like that. How do we use our strengths instead, right? To give us like a healthier, I don't know, way of living in a way, if that makes sense.
It does. It does.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite questions to ask therapists is, as a professional in the field of mental health, what are some of the tools that you use to practice positive mental health, self-care, and prevent burnout?
Okay. Yeah. Can I be honest?
Of course.
Yeah, I'm going to be 100% honest because I feel like it's helpful. When I was a little bit younger, I think it's changed now, but especially throughout my undergrad, all of those things, I was not a self-care girl at all. Like I genuinely, for the longest time, did not understand the point. Like, I'm being honest because I know there's lots of people who feel this way now. And I just like, I think it was just always the whole performance of life. Like, a lot of people they praise performance, so it was never really taught to me that I need to take care of myself. I didn't understand the benefit when I was like, I'm taking care of myself, so I'm not doing as much, and then I fall behind, you know what I mean, all of these things. Where now I think that self-care is literally a job requirement. I say now, you know what I mean? Like, for me, going to therapy, for me, taking time off, for me, practicing mindfulness, all of those things, I genuinely say to myself all the time, if I'm not doing this and if I'm not managing myself, I have no business coming to work. You know what I mean? And I think it's just completely shifted my brain because now it's like, I won't show up if I can't show up 100%. I don't think it's fair for clients to come and see me and to pay me and for me to not be fully in the room. And that's really important to me. And part of being able to do that is taking care of myself outside of work and practicing self care, understanding what I need. And I think that even there have been times where I've been able to do that and be honest with clients. And I think it has helped our relationship to say, like, this is how I'm taking care of myself, or like different things, just being honest and kind of modeling those things. But always a work in progress. And I'm always like listening to what are other people doing, you know, and I learn a lot from my coworkers or other people in the field. But yeah, it's kind of just holding space for those things and reminding myself that, like, in order to be good at my job, this is a requirement. This is actually really important and it will never not be important. Yeah.
Is that exclusive to therapy, or is that or
No,
to a therapist, or is that
no.
every industry?
Every industry. I feel like this same example is something like I used to work in with in pregnancy related concerns. So lots of moms and a lot of, like, I think especially when I'm working with moms or parents, there's always the feeling of not doing enough, all of these different things. And I'm never going to go and tell like a parent, oh, you need to go practice self-care when, you know, it's hard for you to find time to shower or something like that. But something that I used to say a lot is that I do know that when it comes to moms, like, especially moms, like superhumans, you know, and they're always fighting for their kids. But if we saw self-care as a way to fight for your kids, saying, I want to show up 100% present, so I'm also going to prioritize my mental health, my self-care. And the other thing that I think is really important is to pay attention to what are we modeling, right? When we're practicing self-care, are we modeling that actually taking care of yourself is a priority versus I don't ever have time to do that. What are we modeling then? So I think it's really, really important that it's like kind of same that I think it's a part of my job description, like even showing up well in for interpersonal relationships. It's really hard when we're overloaded. So I think it's really, really important that we're present in the important moments and everywhere we go.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I couldn't agree more. Um, you talked about performance culture, or, some people
Yeah.
call it performance paradigm.
Mm-hmm.
And, to ask you maybe a personal question,
For sure.
living in Calgary, probably like any busy city, I think there's just a general performance culture in
Mm-hmm.
Calgary. I'm just curious, do you think that struggle with performance culture that you struggle with, I definitely struggle with.
Mm-hmm.
Do you see that as being a personality thing? Do you see that being a cultural thing,
Mm-hmm.
or is that like maybe a family of origin issue? Is
Mm-hmm.
that something that you came from? I know that's definitely part of my family of origin. We really
Right.
derive a lot of value in what we can do, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm just curious. What's your thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, I think kind of combination. I know for me, my family is like that. So I know that that's a part of it for me personally. But um, more generally, I think that any type of, what do I want to call it? Mentality is learned behavior or environmental. You know what I mean? Like a lot of times, kind of like I said, um, there can be a culture and expectation of, oh, when I do more, people like me more. I'm appreciated. I'm respected. So it makes sense for people that it's like it is our it's a regular human desire to want to connect with other people, and I think that people do the best with what they have. So for some people, it's the way that I've learned is that when I do, people like me, people love me, people want to be around me. So it's not surprising to me that for people who have learned that, that is how, you know, they go into life. It could be so many other things for other people that looks the same, but it's different. You know what I mean? It's learned behavior and it's coping. You know, we do the best with what we have. And um, I think there's personal consequences to that, but I know that people are doing their best. But and sometimes obviously people come and see people like me and we help people with that kind of strength based approach. Is there other things where I don't know what makes you worthy of love? You know what I mean? And everyone is, but it's more of like it's not this when I do, but as a person, you know what I mean? And kind of separating those things and looking at it that way, it's kind of like a foundational change. It's a lot, you know what I mean? But it's really, really important to be having those conversations and kind of like we talked about earlier, just evaluating like how do I know this? You know what I mean? Like it kind of comes back to that once again. How do you know that? Where did that come from?
Right.
And
I
people
love
always
that.
know more than they think. Yeah.
Interesting. It's like it's
Hmm.
subconsciously the answer's there. We just
Yeah.
haven't outwardly spoken it or consciously recognized it.
We don't
Well,
have the
that's
time to pay attention,
well,
right?
that's a
Yeah.
that's a great point, right? I mean, we're all
Hmm.
so busy. At
Yeah.
times, it's almost like we're all in this perpetual hamster wheel, just doing and doing, and
Hmm.
sometimes it's like, what's the point? I
Right.
guess that's probably a great segue into my last question for you
Yeah.
is, you know, what advice would you provide someone who's considering therapy? Maybe they're
Mm.
struggling with performance paradigm, as I call it, or they're
Hmm.
struggling with perfectionism, or maybe they're struggling with shame in their life, and but they're feeling hesitant to enter into that therapeutic relationship. What would
Hmm.
be some advice that you'd give to a person like that?
Like in the way of maybe because of some of those things feeling like inadequate or unworthy type of thing. Is that or
Yeah,
not?
or
Yeah.
or maybe it's therapy is foreign, or maybe from a
Mm.
cultural perspective, it's seen as there's something wrong with you that you need to
Mm.
see a therapist. Um,
Right.
but there's so much benefit that can come from connecting with a therapist. What would you tell someone that's there's just that hesitancy to
Right.
engage in the counseling process? I
Hmm.
know I've
I
experienced
mean,
that many times. Even
yeah.
after
Okay. Yeah.
seeing a therapist many times, I still
Yeah.
sometimes sense that hesitancy.
Right. I mean, I think one thing I've even learned is how much people really do not know about therapy. Like the
Mm,
amount of times people love to tell me about my job, and it's so funny because when they describe it, I'm like, I don't do any of that. Like it's like I can always tell people who've never been to therapy because I'm like, I've never been to the place you're describing. I don't do any of that. But yeah, I just think there's a lot that is talked about and kind of like the conversation we're having previously about doing the best with what you have. For some people, I know that um, going to see someone external feels like failure or like you're weak, which, like, this is my bias, I will say when I'm saying this, but to me, I'm like, so are you saying that when you encounter something and you don't really know what to do about it, it makes you weak to seek solutions, to try, you know what I mean? Or to like, to find someone to help you heal, you know what I mean? All of these things. Or is it cooler to suffer in silence? You know what I mean? I feel like sometimes when we say it like that, it's cooler to like suffer and to be miserable just to make us look, you know what I mean, in some ways. So
yeah.
I feel like it's a social discourse in that way for some people. I think the other thing is I always like to ask clients first session, like, how are you feeling, are you nervous, all of these things. And I find most of the time people say yes, and I say, like, what are you nervous about? The answer is pretty much always the same. It's the unknown. No one ever knows what they're nervous about. And I say that and I'm like, okay, like, is it just the idea of not knowing what to expect? And people usually are like, yeah. So then usually at the end of maybe the first session or so, I like to check in. Sometimes I'll be like, okay, like on a scale of 1 to 10, like from zero being I'm cool as a cucumber, 10 being I'm about to jump out the window, like where are you? I usually ask at the beginning and the end just to see if there is movement. And I usually ask, like what would make it a 5 instead of a 6 or any of those things, and then see how it changes. And I think it's usually changes at the end, and it's because it's like, okay, like it actually was better than I was expecting. That wasn't so scary, and it was just like, oh, now I have a frame of reference and I feel
Right.
better. So just
Right.
like all the things that people don't know, all of the misconceptions about therapy. So I think it actually is really important to talk to someone, be direct, ask questions. Like I am never afraid when people are like, so are you just gonna like diagnose me with it? Like I have no problem. Come ask your questions. I'm not afraid. And because I'd rather do that and kind of just see like what is it that you're looking for? Do you know what I mean? Is this gonna happen? Or like is your worst fear something that like is never gonna happen? Like that's kind of different than the process. So I think it's important for everyone to decide for themselves.
You, you
Yeah.
just you just triggered a great question, or a question in my mind, a thought, I should
Yeah, yeah,
say,
yeah.
is I loved what you just said there. You're effectively giving advice on how a person can best get out of counseling all that they could potentially get. And I
Mm,
guess maybe to ask you that as a question. If you were to give two pieces of advice to a person who's either maybe already started the therapy process or the counseling process or is thinking about getting started, what are some of the things that you would recommend, or what type of advice would you provide for a person to get the absolute most out of counseling?
Mm.
Because it's not cheap. Like, I get
It's
that it's
not
not
cheap.
cheap,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
what's the advice
Hmm.
that you'd provide?
For sure. This is actually something I talk about a lot. And I think, first of all, I tell clients that like a first session, I say, I'm like, just so you know, this is a job interview for me. I think clients, the biggest thing that I see is that clients have no idea how much control and input they have in the process. Like they really do come to see me thinking that I'm going to tell them everything, where I'm like, I don't work like that, which is exactly why I think when people are like, you're not going to tell me everything. I'm like, no, what do you think? Or all of these different things that I actually want to collaborate and work together. I think that is
Right.
surprising. So I think number one, go into it that way of being like, this is a job interview. I tell people all the time, like I always say to clients, you don't have to like me. They always think I'm joking, but I'm not. But more in the sense of like, I say like, this is about your health. So I fully support if you think that that would be best with somebody else. I'm not
Mhm.
offended any of those things, because the biggest thing is about who makes you feel most comfortable and who you can do the best work with, because one of the biggest indicators of therapeutic success is the therapeutic relationship. It's so important.
Mhm.
It's not worth ignoring those feelings. Like, lots of people talk about a feeling in their gut of not feeling comfortable and ignoring it. You don't have to
Right.
ignore it. There is a difference between feeling uncomfortable and feeling unsafe, maybe. But like, I think it's really important that you pay attention to your gut and say, like, do I feel comfortable here? Because if you're not comfortable and not able to open up, it can impact the relationship. So I think that that is really, really important. Um, what else would I say? Oh, the other thing I think that I hear a lot too is some people will say, "I'm not ready to start therapy because I don't know what I want to talk about," which is so interesting to me because I don't know. I don't think people need to have it all figured out to see a counselor, or lots of people who struggle maybe to identify their emotions. They won't come in because they're like, I don't know what that's called. But lots of people will come for that reason. And like,
Yeah.
lots of times I'll say like, don't go too far ahead. I'm like, I don't expect you to know how to do that. We can work on this together. And a lot of
Right.
times they're not ready for that. They think they have to be at a certain level to be there, where I'm like, come as you are and we'll work on it together. You know what I mean? What are you experiencing? And we'll go from there, type of thing. So I think just knowing that like, you don't have to be anything. Like, I don't have expectations for clients. It's really just like, okay, like what work do we want to do here, and how are we going to work together to meet this goal?
That's
So that's what I
awesome.
say.
I
Mm-hmm.
love it. Can I give you my biggest piece of advice
Yeah, I love it.
to the average client?
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the things that's so fundamentally different about the therapeutic relationship to an
Mm-hmm.
ordinary relationship is, in an ordinary relationship, there's a desire for an equality in
Mm-hmm.
conversation, that you and I are both contributing to the conversation. We're both being vulnerable. We're both engaging in that relationship. But in the client therapist relationship, if I'm the
Mm-hmm.
client, it's actually my opportunity to, it sounds terrible, but take advantage of the energy and the focus that that therapist is
Yeah,
providing,
that's
and
a
to
good one.
really take advantage of it. It sounds selfish to say, it sounds self-focused,
No.
but that's the important part of the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggle with that sometimes. I'm like, okay, I got to remember, the therapist, he or she, is here to actually invest in me. That's what
Yeah.
I'm paying them
I always say
for.
this is your time. This is
Exactly.
about you.
I know, I feel so guilty sometimes. I'm like, Tola, how are you? Like, what's going on
Yeah.
in
But
your world?
lots
Talk
of
to
people
me.
struggle with that. So they're like, let me tell you about my family. And I'm like, this is your time. You know what I mean? And that's hard for people, which I get.
Yeah,
But
that's one of
yeah, it's
my
good.
my biggest. And the other thing I liked what you said is, know what you want to talk about in therapy. And sometimes it may simply just be, I don't actually know what I want to talk about, but
Yeah.
there's this weird situation that keeps happening, and I have this weird feeling in my stomach. And as a dude, us guys struggle to communicate our emotions.
Yeah.
I mean, like, 99% of our emotions are, I'm frustrated,
Mm.
maybe angry.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the two emotions,
Right. Those are the
like
ones.
those are the only ones.
Right.
The reality is we actually have a lot more emotions going on. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's just that process of even being able to talk to a therapist and understand,
Yeah.
oh, I'm actually feeling embarrassed or
Hmm.
shame or betrayed or whatever that is.
Hmm.
Anyways, Tola, thank you so much for your time. If you want to connect with Tola and you want to connect with her and experience what it's like to work with Tola as a therapist, you can connect with us at masterscounseling.com and you can find more information on her bio. Thank you, Tola, and
Thanks,
look forward to
Matthew.
connecting again soon.
Sounds good.